this is from popular demand from your TikTok users, right?
Absolutely. I never thought in my wildest dreams that anyone would be interested in my little stories about the law, but apparently people are, which is awesome.
So welcome, Jahan. Welcome to your own show.
Thank you very much for having me. I have my own show.
And have I got your name right there?
You have. So the way to remember my name is I've heard Johan, I've heard Jahan. It's Jahan, like Jahan Premium Light. That's the phrase you need to use to make sure you keep it in your head locked away correctly.
And it's premium.
It is premium.
It is premium. Is it light?
It is very light.
Light-hearted.
Yes, that's right.
And that's the idea behind this little vidcast here. If you're still there, you've probably gone now. You've probably closed your phone in disgust at this terrible attempt at banter. But here we are on Friday. This is the day that lockdown was supposed to be ending. So it was supposed to be a 4-week lockdown. So we had all of July off. And it was supposed to be ending today, but we had an announcement a couple of days ago that it was going to be extended throughout August.
That's right, James. So I guess the reason we've chosen to do this is because there's a lot of uncertainty right now around what you can and can't do, what the laws say, how how your rights exist in this current context. And I started doing some TikToks around the time that lockdown began, just to kind of share some stories and talk a little bit about, my interpretation of some of the legislation. And that's the first thing to remember is this is just my interpretation. It's general advice. It's not legal advice. Everybody gets legal advice for their specific situation. But there are some things I'm hearing that are categorically incorrect and are just super off the mark. And so I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could have a chance to talk about some of these things, discuss, I guess, what lockdown will look like going forward, talk about the law in general, and sort of correct some of those obviously incorrect things.
Okay. Well, is there something that you can think of that's obviously incorrect? I thought Gladys has been pretty clear on.
I think the difficulty is that because the situation evolves so quickly, you can't. The information also changes day by day. So, for example, if we were to have filmed this 3 days ago, we would be selling completely different messages than the ones that we're saying today. And so I think that it's the speed of the information, which is off-putting for people. And it's also, I guess, a misunderstanding around how state laws work, how federal laws work, what the Constitution says you can and can't do. Those are the issues that I think are causing a lot of distress because the most important thing is it's irrelevant whether you agree with it or not. The law is the law. And while it may be subject to interpretation, some things are absolutely clear as day and some things are clear as mud. So I guess if we can clear up the stuff that should be clear as day, we can then focus on, well, what's as clear as mud?
Okay, so what's the clarity that you've seen within this? And can you relate it to some of the questions that you've been asked on TikTok over the last week? Because your comments have just been exploding. I mean, I've been monitoring it because I work with you on this on a marketing level, and the engagement that you've been getting, the messages that you've been getting off your content have just exploded. But they've been very specific about what they were asking.
Yeah, First things, I really want to thank everyone on TikTok who follows me. I want to thank them for their comments. I assume whenever somebody writes a comment, they write it in good faith, although some of them are absolutely not in good faith. And if you do, I'm going to, we'll have a bit of a rumble. But I think it's really important that there's no such thing as a stupid question. We're in a time of extreme uncertainty. And I, for one, have... I've read all the public health orders now. I've read the legislation relating to the Constitution. I spent the whole weekend reviewing that stuff. And it is confusing. So don't feel like you're an idiot if you don't get it. Don't feel stupid. I'm a practicing lawyer. I've been practicing almost a decade now, and I find it super confusing. And I have expertise in this area as well. So I'm not a newbie to it. I think it's just around clarity. There is actually... with some of the messaging coming out, I think a disconnect between the public health order as it's written and what the government is saying we can and can't do. Let's ignore that for the second. Let's just deal with the stuff that we know to be correct, and let's start with stuff that is pretty easy to understand on the face of it, if that's okay with you.
Please go ahead.
So one thing that people seem to be having a difficulty understanding is that how can the state make a law like this? What's the legality around that? Well, the states are each responding to the pandemic in a different way. And all of the public health orders that we're seeing here in New South Wales relate to state-based legislation, which means that they come from our state-based parliament, not our federal parliament. And that makes sense because what happens is the response needs to be tailored to the situation in the state. So it makes sense for that power to be delegated to the state. One thing that I've been seeing a lot of is people commenting, well, what about the federal government? Do they get a say? Don't they get a say? You know, the Biosecurity Act, it says this, it says that. Well, if you look at the Biosecurity Act, which is a Commonwealth Act, Section 8 says that the state-based laws and the federal-based laws can work in tandem and should work in tandem. And a lot of people seem to be confused around how does federal law work. Essentially, if the federal government takes a power or takes responsibility for an area, then they have a responsibility for that area. In the absence of them explicitly taking responsibility for an area, the power vests with the state. And the biosecurity laws, all of those types of laws, they are not dealing with the state-based issue of how do we deal with the Delta strain. So it's not correct to say the federal government has no say in this. They do, of course they do. It's more around who's the appropriate party to deal with the situation, and it's the state government.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks for the clarification. But I think a lot of people are kind of tuning in to see what this actually means for them. This sounds like a lot of kind of legalese to me. I mean, I don't have a background in law, I'd like to say at this point. So construction, what does all this mean for construction?
Okay, so construction was one of the areas that was shut down because of this lockdown. And, it affected a lot of people really dramatically. People seem to think that construction projects, because they tend to make money at key milestones, people in construction are loaded. They're not. They often live week to week, particularly the subcontractors who work on those types of jobs. So let's look at what we definitely know. If you are in one of the 8 LGAs, and the LGA stands for local government area, that's been marked by the government as being a hotspot, you cannot have any construction projects there. So that's a simple one. You can't do any construction.
Nothing at all.
Nothing at all. On Saturday, the 31st of July, being tomorrow, there will be an opening of the opening of construction back up, and that you have to comply with certain guidelines. Now, I think those guidelines are, if you are a construction worker and it's a project that's not in one of those LGAs, you can have 2 people working on internal projects, assuming they never have anything to do with the residents of that apartment, or 5 working on an outdoor area, assuming that there's no connection with the residents of the property. And there's various other sort of different rules. You've got to be COVID safe. You must have a COVID safe plan. You must do various things and bits and pieces. But construction, barring those 8 LGAs, has opened again to an extent. So that's an important one.
So is this going to be now a logistical and regulation nightmare for business owners?
I think it's going to open some challenges. Absolutely. For example,
it's the perfect time to be in workplace health and safety, isn't it? I mean,
Absolutely.
It's a boom area.
Absolutely. And look, I've got clients in this space. One of the problems that we were dealing with yesterday was actually a client calls me up and goes, "Hey, I need 3 skilled trades on the inside of this job. I need a plumber, I need a chippy, and I need a sparky. How are we going to do this if we can only have 2?" And we spoke to we sought out some advice, and if we can do maybe, we ended up with a very basic plan: chippy and sparky day 1, chippy and plumber day 2, sparky and plumber day 3, day 4 projects completed. So you got to think, I guess, outside of the box. It's not business as usual.
No. So what are the threats to business? So say you accidentally break some of these guidelines. What should they do if they? I mean, it's lockdown. Are all the lawyers at home watching TV? I mean, I'm not asking you to sell your services here, by the way. So get back in your box. But there are people available to help, surely.
Absolutely. Look, I'm not the only lawyer in town, and I'll be perfectly honest. There's many lawyers as good as I am. Not many better. But certainly, if you find yourself falling foul of these, there's a lot of advice available. The reality is that because it's such a new and novel area, no one's an expert in it. And when no one's an expert in it, it's a real opportunity. It's kind of like being in the Bitcoin space a decade ago when no one knew about it. There was all this learning and growing to do. I'm very hesitant to suggest anyone's an expert on it, because how can you be? We're just making it up as we go along. But if you fall foul of it, if you make a mistake, if you get hit with a fine, if you're unsure, seek advice. I mean, that's the first step. And then we can give you the legal advice rather than this general advice I'm sharing here.
But surely they should be calling Service New South Wales or whoever it is within the local government authority. Is it? I mean, who do they call first of all? If they've got a question about the regulation, they wouldn't go straight to a lawyer, would they?
No. Look, Service New South Wales is a great port of call. One of the difficulties I found, and I don't know if it's currently in place, but I'll take a government authority like the Roads and Maritime Services, the RMS. I've had clients, and we're jumping to a completely different area of the law now, like licensing laws.
Tell me a story. People love your stories.
So what tends to happen is there is so much confusion and misinformation that you could go into the RMS on Monday and hear do ABC, and then you go in on Wednesday and you hear do ZXY, and then you go in on C and you hear, in ancient Greek do, alpha, beta, zeta. It's so hard to get a clear answer. And you can't rely on that conversation, generally speaking, as being definitive of the position that you're in. That's the challenge. Because the reality is that Service New South Wales, and I talked about this in one of my videos, they're members of the executive, which means their job is to enforce the laws and help you enforce the laws. It's not their job to interpret it. That's the job of the judiciary. That's the job of magistrates, judges, justices, lawyers. And the difficulty is there's so little interpretation on it.
So hold on, if you're looking for a definitive answer for a specific situation, Service New South Wales aren't going to help you.
No, they may help you, but they may get it wrong. And you can't really rely upon that.
They may get it wrong?
They absolutely may get it wrong. Absolutely.
So who would you be speaking to is it some just a call center operative that has a script? I mean, in this situation, in a lockdown, you have a very specific problem, specific to your business and specific to the evolving regulation. How much confidence would you have that the person answering your query at the New South Wales administration knows what they're talking about? How do you know that it's not going to come back at you tenfold?
You don't. You don't. And I'm not being critical of the Service New South Wales people at all. They're very educated. They work super hard, and it's a complicated job. But they can get it wrong. I can get it wrong.
No.
That's the reality.
Don't. You're killing me.
You can.
There's
Absolutely.
a child inside me that's just...
But I've got insurance. So if I get it wrong and, I've made a mistake, feel free to sue me, because I've got the insurance that you can rely upon. That's the difference.
Yeah.
And it's very hard for someone in that position who's got a million tasks to give you clear, concise advice. Look, some positions are better than others. For example, what is an authorized worker that gives you permission? There's a list. There's a list and there's subcategories in those lists. Now, some of them are clear-cut, some of them are not clear-cut. If you're unsure, that's something that I think you can have a little bit more clarity around. But it's just so complex, and it's just shifting and evolving and changing every single day. So
okay, let's move on. Okay, so singles.
Yes,
that has been broached several times. So there are a lot of single people out there that are probably feeling a little bit. I mean, I've got a family. I'm surrounded by children the whole time. The idea of being in isolation by myself is actually it would be delightful. I could finish box sets. I mean, I never get to do anything, right? But of course, there's those poor old people that are in the opposite situation. So they want to bubble up with someone. What's the regulations for that?
That's a really good one. And firstly, it's so important that anyone in that situation who's living by themselves, I've got friends who are living by themselves, and my partner's got friends, and it's really tough.
I mean, these guys are often in small apartments, studio apartments.
Absolutely,
often, yeah.
Absolutely. Even the ones in bigger apartments, it's lonely. It's hard. You feel that.
Yeah.
And please make sure you check on anyone that is in that situation. That's the first thing I'd tell everyone to do. Make sure you check on that. Make sure that you speak to people who are in that situation. Make sure you make that they feel the love and that they know that people are out there for them. In terms of the way that it worked traditionally was, if you were in an intimate relationship, you could travel to that partner's house and back, regardless of the LGA you're in. And I think that that's still the law today.
So that was the regulation from lockdown 1, was it?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, I think that was still in place. Now, with this new one, I'm not sure because the regulation has changed and shifted, and we're filming this now like at 11:20. There's a press conference going on that we should probably watch in a bit.
In fact, we might take a pause in this just so we're totally current after this conversation. We might take a pause and then come back to what's actually happening. But just carry on with what we were talking about with the single.
But I think that what the single bubble is if you pick a person, not multiple people, if you pick a person that you want to form a single bubble with, you can travel to that person, assuming you're not, I think it's if you're not in one of those 8 LGAs. If you're in one of those 8 LGAs, I think different regulations apply, but I am not sure.
Yeah, we'll check that.
We'll check that. But you can go and see that person. And when you go and see that person, it's sort of like being in an intimate relationship. But it's one person that you pick sort of to have a buddy system because the health advice had said, there's a risk of Delta transmission, but it's outweighed by the mental health stress of being by yourself.
And that's a big omission by New South Wales, isn't it? Because before, the transmission of the virus is everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing that surmounts it to the extent where they'd stall the entire economy. But now they've said that, the buddy system will operate, which is fantastic, really, because I think it's an admission that there has to be some semblance of normal lives. Otherwise, when we come out of the lockdown, what do we come back to? We want some semblance of our former selves, surely.
I'm so lucky in that I'm lucky enough to be in an approved profession where I can actually sit down and I'm allowed to go to the office. I'm allowed to go to court. I have something that resembles a normal day to day. I go home to my partner. We have a beautiful house and I have really a normal sort of life.
Well, routine's so important, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even I have gone somewhat feral. Like if we went to a restaurant now, I wouldn't know how to conduct myself. You forget the back and forth of normal human interaction. Yeah. So I think that they've done a beautiful thing by opening the singles bubble and talking about the reality of the fact that this is the information that we know is current and we want to make sure people are able to.
So is there anything that people need to know about that? If there's like one takeaway about the singles bubble, so one thing that they must do, one thing that they mustn't do?
Pick only one person and make sure that person and you are eligible to be in a singles bubble. Do not swap and change.
Okay, fantastic. And on a lighter note, we're in lockdown. How do you get that moustache? I assume that takes some kind of professional intervention to get it swirly like that, or is there some tips you can give to young Jahans out there who want to imitate you?
Firstly, don't imitate me. Pick a real idol. But I can look. The comments on the mustache, which I expected, it's gone gangbusters. So the reality is, I grew this some 4 or 5 years ago. It started as all great things do, just sort of this little wisp of a mustache, and then I think I was traveling at the time, and I saw a guy in Italy who had just one that was just glorious, and I thought, I want a mustache like that. And for anyone who's interested, it's not that complex. You just sort of, it will go through a really festy stage, and then it will start to get to a stage where you can curl it. I put a lot of wax in it, and then I put a pencil and I twirl it. I hold it there, I pull it back.
Is that an HB pencil? Or
it is a HB pencil, 2 HB.
Is that important?
I feel that it's critical.
Yeah.
But you basically curl it around, pull it out, and then push it back like Hercule Poirot.
Right. The reference for all the young ones out there.
Hercule Poirot was an Agatha Christie detective. He was Belgium's greatest detective. There was a really cheesy TV show made up about him where there's a great actor.
David Suchet, that one, I think.
David Suchet.
Hey, we're doing this for the kids,
Seriously, check it out. It's
let's
amazing.
Talk about Dad's Army and the lower now. We get really down with the kids. Now, what we're going to do now is just take a little break. We're going to check the numbers, and we'll get back to you in a second. Would you like to tell us what the figures are?
Yeah, it's 170 cases, I think.
170. So that is slightly down from yesterday, but yesterday was a record high, right?
It was.
We're not talking great figures here, but I think everyone's seeing the way this is going. So that's now 5 or 6 days after the protest that happened on Saturday, and everyone's fear was that would be a super spreader event. Now, it's unclear whether the figures today have come from this protest on Saturday, but can you tell us, is there anything else being planned? I think I've heard...
From what I've read online, there is going to be another protest tomorrow in relation to the anti-lockdown. And I guess if I could take a position on that, I think that we really need to... Let me begin by saying that I have nothing but sympathy from people who are sick of the lockdown. I understand the frustration. I grew up in Western Sydney. My family's still in Western Sydney.
But it wasn't just people from Western Sydney there, though.
No, it wasn't. It was people from everywhere. The Central Coast, all areas of New South Wales came to that.
A lot of people from the Northern Beaches, I hear, came down as well.
Well, I think police are still conducting inquiries, but essentially, I understand why it feels like people in the East get a pass when you see footage of people basically living like nothing has changed. And you look at photos of people in the West and what seems to be a more heavy-handed response, because if lockdowns aren't perceived to be fair, people aren't going to treat them with the gravity that they deserve. What I will say is, if you want to protest against the lockdown, there are many ways to do it that don't require you to physically endanger yourself and the community. You can write to the members of parliament.
Oh, come on. When has writing to a member of parliament ever made a difference with anything? We're in a situation here where there might be martial law declared. There's already army on the streets. Just in Western Sydney. They're not in Bondi, are they?
Well, I've read about that. Let me start with the point about, does writing letters change things? Absolutely it does. I wouldn't be a lawyer if I didn't believe that there was a way to deal with problems through civil discourse rather than violence. That's the entire reason lawyers exist, because there's ways to get change, and one of the ways is you petition.
But hold on. Well, what I'm saying is that, martial law is about to be declared, in my eyes. I mean, surely if they're taking that kind of response, there's nothing that you can do that's within the normal scope of what you'll do to protest, is there? If they're taking it up that level, you've got to take it up another level.
I would say in times of uncertainty like this, that's when we need to have the most faith in the institutions that keep a civil society civil, like the courts, like the press, like Parliament. And if you don't like it, there are plenty of journalists that I've seen who are happy to cover stories about how bad lockdown is. If you are unhappy with the response, you can write to the other. Parliament's all about change constantly and finding new members of the legislature that speak for the people. If you don't think your parliamentarians are speaking for you, petition to change them. So,
I mean, there's levels of breakdown in trust across the West. You've seen it with the UK, with Brexit, Trumpism in America. So you think there's still we have that trust in the institutions here? Do you think that's being eroded by what's happening here?
I think that there is an understandable skepticism of the positions taken in certain things. I think the government messaging at times has been unclear and has been confusing. I think everyone's just doing their best, and I understand their frustration. But the reality of the situation is that if you go to these protests and you spread the virus to your community, you may be killing or hurting people. And that's, no matter how important your political message is, there's a more effective way of having it heard, and it's not to do this.
And there's a financial punishment for that as well. Now, I mean, there was before, but the new financial punishment is a doubling, is it not?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but there will be a fine. It will be substantial.
I believe it was a doubling,
okay.
which they announced yesterday.
Okay. Yeah. It very well might be. And like I said, those fines are open to challenge. If there's a reasonable excuse for you to be out, and this is another point that's so important to raise, reasonable excuse is not for the police officer on the street giving the fine to determine. Sometimes it's super clear cut. Somebody's out having a party or doing something stupid, sure. But sometimes reasonable, it's a term of art. It's flexible, and that's really for a magistrate to determine in a court of law. So I think that when there's silly fines being issued, that erodes public confidence enormously, because people go, well, what am I supposed to do? I'm in this situation where I'm doing what I think is the right thing, and I'm being punished for it. But it's so important. It's so important that in times of stress, the power of the courts cannot be understated. And it's one of the most powerful pieces of a functional democracy. I've heard terms like fascism being thrown at me. This is not fascism by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, if you think this is fascism, go read a history book. See what fascism actually is. This is not the start of a slippery slope that leads to all of our civic liberties being taken away. That's not how this is. This is people trying to do their best to deal with something we haven't dealt with for a generation.
Well, the slogan is freedom, isn't it? That's what the protesters are protesting about, limits on freedom. Do you think this is a reasonable limit on freedom given the circumstances?
All laws are about the interplay between your freedom and your responsibility. That's all that a law is. And do I think that the current laws go so far that we can say that they have broken the public trust? No, I don't. I think the laws are doing the best to achieve their purpose. You may disagree with the government. You may disagree with the way they've gone about it. Lord knows I do. I challenge the government all of the time on numerous decisions that affect my clients' lives. If I think there's an issue, I write to Parliament. I mean, I still rely upon that.
Would you defend Horse Guy? Do you know who I'm talking about? Who am I talking about?
You are talking about the gentleman who allegedly assaulted the horse or pushed the horse away from him. Absolutely. If Horse Guy came to us for legal advice and he wanted to listen to what we had to say, we would represent him. I'd represent anyone. That's it's a principle that's primarily at the bar, but it's called the cab rank rule. And what it means is that if somebody comes to you and says, "Please help me," and you have the expertise to help them, you have the time, they're prepared to deal with the conditions such as your fee and listening to your advice, you must help them. And I think it's a beautiful principle because everyone's entitled to a high quality defense. And if Horse Guy wanted us to defend him and he was prepared to abide by our advice, pay our fee, we had the time, the capacity, and the skills to help him, of course we would help him.
Well, the latest on Horse Guy is that he's actually stuck behind bars because he's been refusing to take a COVID test.
That's a matter for him. I mean, I don't know the advice that is relevant to give to Horse Guy.
We should use his name, but we don't actually know his name.
Mr. Guy.
We should coin a name for him.
Yeah, Mr. Guy.
Mr. Guy.
Because he's Horse Guy.
Yeah.
So Mr. Guy.
Mr. Guy.
Say what you want about this guy. He definitely believes in his principles. I don't think any lawyer would have advised him not to take that test. I think we would say that under the public health orders, in a circumstance like the one he's in, it's not. I think the law states you should and have to take a test. If he chooses not to, that's fine, but there's a price to pay.
Absolutely. Okay, so one of the questions that's come up on TikTok is like whether you can be, or you see in the future, you'll be forced to be vaccinated to access government services, to go abroad, to access anything that we've taken for granted. I mean, I can see it's within my comprehension that I can imagine that Medicare might be withdrawn if you refuse to be vaccinated. What's your opinion on this?
Firstly, many countries, before they will grant you a visa, require you to be vaccinated against certain diseases. Australia requires you to be vaccinated against certain diseases before you migrate here or visit here. So this idea is not particularly controversial or unique. I think the hesitancy is because this is such a novel virus and we've not dealt with it before. It's what are the consequences of the vaccine on our physical health and what will it look like 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? Because as much as we would like, we don't have a crystal ball, we can't tell. I think that before that step happens, the first thing is that the vaccine needs to be made available to anyone who wants it. And it hasn't been, really. There's still limitations around who can get it and who can access it. So I think that's a discussion that comes later on down the line once the vaccine's been made more readily available.
I mean, you're a clever guy. What do you see in 18 months' time? Do you think that there'll be enforced vaccinations for certain services?
I think that there will be enforced vaccinations if you're working in certain sectors. I do not think that you will have services withheld from you if you are not vaccinated. That being said, I can't speak to the future.
It's a world in flux, isn't it? But you're an educated guy.
Yeah, that's my guess.
Yeah, okay. I just want to talk a little bit about a question that you've been asked on TikTok, because I've been monitoring a lot of your stuff, and the apprentice-related tradie content has been getting a lot of comments, but it's a TikTok audience, right? So These are 16, 17-year-olds often, and so they don't qualify for certain payments. Do you have any advice or anything you can give them at all?
My heart breaks, and I'm so sorry you're in that situation. It sucks. I think that you don't qualify unless I'm mistaken, but speak to an accountant. Accountants know this stuff far better than we do. I've been talking to my accountant daily, figuring out what programs we're eligible for, if any, what requirements we need to meet, if any. It is one of those situations, and you will find this, especially if you're a 17-year-old, it will happen throughout your entire life, that there are arbitrary things that suck.
Hold on, there are 17-year-olds that are 17 for all of their life?
No, They are 17 when they're 17, but they will
Right.
find a running theme.
I just wanted to clarify
Absolutely.
that
And
because
the
I would personally love to be 17 for the rest of my life.
Not at all. In the
Yeah.
middle of puberty, stressed out,
Oh yeah,
having to deal
actually,
with
I'm thinking about 24. 24 is a good.
Yeah,
good
oh,
age,
24,
yeah,
25.
17 is too young.
24. Yes, dude, 17's hard.
Yeah.
People, 17-year-olds have it really tough. They still haven't figured out who they are yet. They still don't know what they're going to do. There's all this expectation on them. It's difficult, but
But
essentially,
they're working though, aren't they? I mean, lots of these kids, and they are kids because they're not 18 yet.
Yeah.
they're working. They're apprentices.
absolutely. They're out there trying to figure out who they are. They're trying to add value. They're figuring out their place in society. It's all very complex. And one of the things that you'll see that's a running theme, and I'm double your age, I'm 34, is that there's just these arbitrary things that happen to you in life where, if you got 75, you have a distinction, and all of a sudden you're going to get this and that opportunity. And if you get 74, you don't. One example that happens in my life all of the time is we'll go to the court and we'll be before the registrar. The registrar will say, go to court 4.5, and in court 4.5 is Judge Super Nice, and Judge Super Nice gives you a pat in the head and says, don't do it again. And he goes, if you go in front of the registrar, go to court 4.3, and you go in front of Judge Hates Your Guts, and Hates Your Guts might put you in jail. Life is filled with these arbitrary decisions that you have no control over. The only thing I can say is I'm super sorry you're in that situation. It's not fair, but things will get better, and thankfully construction has reopened.
Okay. Is there anything that these guys need to be looking out for?
Speak to your accountants. If possible, get the advice that you can. You may be eligible for more than you think. The government is rolling out new packages daily, topping off people's payments, and that might really add some value.
These guys might not have an accountant. Where do they go? Should they ask their boss, their co-workers?
Speak to your boss. Look, the great thing about accountants is that every community has a bunch of them. There are better accountants and worse accountants, but reach out to whoever you can and say, hey, help me, guide me. Generally speaking, an accountant that is an expert in a subject matter. So there's accountants that are really good with the trades. There's accountants that are really good with professional services. If you can get hold of them, tell them your situation. Just like me, they're soft touches. They'll be happy to help 17-year-olds.
See, there's a problem with the structure of these grants, isn't there? In that you need an accountant to apply for them. And my experience is that a lot of the accountants are working flat out at the moment and might not be totally around all the changes that are going on. So they're saying don't worry about it, but it must be naturally quite worrying if you rely upon this income, but you're waiting for somebody else to come through with a letter for you or your accounts.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you can add to that?
Look, I completely get it. Cash flow management is a really difficult thing because your money runs out while you're waiting for it. Just know that whether it's done today, whether it's done in a week, the government has said it will backdate it to a certain date. So don't worry so much about that. It will be okay.
Okay, righto. You've got a YouTube channel this is going out on, one assumes?
I have started a YouTube
You have
channel.
started a YouTube channel.
And it would be great if you could like and subscribe.
Yeah.
Slam the subscribe key down below.
Yes, if you could do your catchphrase, that'd be good.
Boom.
Could you boom the subscribe button? Does that?
Boom the subscribe button, yo. I'm very uncool.
Yeah, that might not work for our audience, but
I'm trying.
trying terribly
I'm just
hard.
trying. Listen, if it adds any value to you, please subscribe, like. We will be making more content that hopefully is really relevant and hyper relevant to the situation.
Yeah. I mean, please write some comments down below because otherwise we don't know what to talk about. We've talked about lockdown today because it's the only story in town, really.
Yeah.
But you'll have lots of other concerns about the law, and I'm here to ask those questions of Jahan to you.
Beautiful. Thanks, James.
Thanks.